aboard, everybody. We're talking Giants football. Week of the NFL draft. Nothing really to talk about, I don't think, much with Giants.
Quiet time.
But a quiet week, quiet week. Now, there's a lot to talk about, obviously, and you see him right next to me. He's one of our Giants insiders, and he's down at the headquarters himself right now, doing his draft evaluations, getting ready for it. And John Schmeelk, by the way, joining us from Giants.com, reporter, host, everything guy. By the way, we are presented today by Northeast Roofing Professionals. Today's video brought to you by our friends at Box Drop Syracuse. We'll hear from them in just a little bit. John, I didn't expect to be having this conversation with you draft week and saying, hey, the Giants have 2 picks in the top 10. But that's exactly what has happened here. And I want to talk to you first about what this Dexter Lawrence trade has created for the Giants and their flexibility going into this year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it adds some flexibility, and then now you have 2 chances to get top players at 5 and 10. I think in some ways it takes away some flexibility overall because now you have a much bigger need at defensive tackle. Like, I think you have to walk away with a defensive tackle now, one way, shape, or form, right, at some point in the draft. So I think in that way, maybe it does limit your flexibility a little bit. But now at 5 and 10, I think, you could start trying to get cute here and trying to figure out what 2-player combination you want, and then ordering the picks so that it gets more likely you land both guys. You could just keep it simple, pick the best guy at 5, then pick the best guy at 10 and see where they are. You try to split it offense and defense, right? Do you want to do 2 offensive players? You want to do 2 defensive players? And then moving forward, you free up cap space this year, $13 million or so. You free up cap space next year. So it's not even just, Dexter for the 10th overall pick. It's Dexter for the 10th overall pick, and then whatever you're going to use the extra money you have from the trade as well. So, look, I mean, going in, I never thought they'd get that high of a pick for him. I think everybody around the league was kind of surprised too. So, kudos to Joe Shane, Don Aponte, John Harbaugh for getting that return they did on that trade.
Yeah, no question about it. I think we were all surprised. And the fact that the Giants now getting it done a couple of days before the draft now have a chance to really take a good hard look at what they might want to do. Do they want to trade down with one of these picks and acquire something else later in the draft? And who are the targets here? I mean, before we get into the picks, John, let me ask you about the gaping hole that is now in the center of that defensive line. I mean, that is an issue for the Giants. It was already an issue with Dexter Lawrence there. Remove Dexter, and now it's double indemnity. So how do the Giants deal with that? Is that a draft issue, or do you see them potentially working through the free agency market and maybe be able to plug that up a little bit? Let's talk about that piece first.
I mean, I don't think it has to be either or. I think it can be both, right? I mean, they had, reports where they met with DJ Reader a couple weeks ago, the veteran defensive tackle. I think that would make a ton of sense in terms of, adding him as a veteran piece. That's a good run stopper and has been a good run stopper in the league for a long time. So if they can make that addition, if he wants to come here and they can figure out the money, I think that would make a lot of sense. And then in the draft, the problem is that you're not going to find a defensive tackle at 5 or 10. We can go through the names later. But it's just not a great defensive tackle draft. But at 37, that could be a sweet spot. Does Caden McDonald from Ohio State drop to 37? Does Christian Miller from Georgia get to 37? Is Peter Woods someone you want to roll the dice on? Caleb Banks someone you want to roll the dice on? They have some issues as prospects, but they're both immensely talented. So, you could wait to the 4th round, I guess, and go for somebody more on the back end of it. I think that gets a little bit riskier in terms of the quality of players that are going to be there. But yeah, look, I think 37 will be the sweet spot if you're looking for a defensive tackle.
My partner, Paul Esden Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green, who also has 2 picks very in the first round of this draft, is in here as well. Paul, just talking a little bit about this Lawrence trade and a little bit about what the Giants might do to fill that gaping hole. Now I want to break in, John, to the picks themselves, because it is awful tasty having something at 5, having something at 10, and then maybe even be able to mix and match a little bit. I don't know. I've been a big believer over the years that what built the great Giants teams were the great defenses. Should the Giants go back to that blueprint and just go get themselves 2 defensive studs here? Or do you see them looking at Jackson Dart and saying, hey, we got to help this guy. We got to help him right now. Let's go get 2 offensive stars. Or do they mix and match and do one or the other? So as you was just putting out all your scenarios, John, I was thinking the same thing. Paul and I are going to do a mock draft a little bit later, a 3-round mock. It's going to be our final one before the big day. And I was like, I don't know. I could go a million different ways with this. There's so many things I can do. How are you feeling about where the Giants are going to pivot here as they head into the draft?
I would be surprised if it was 2 offensive players, just because I think the nature of the draft class, it's more of a defensive-oriented draft, especially in the top 10. I think those where the better players are at. So I'd be surprised if it was two offensive players. Whether or not they split up offense, defense, I think is interesting. Because, look, I think there is a realistic scenario, and I have a Giants Huddle podcast coming out with Brian Broaddus later today, former NFL scout. And he told me he talked to 5 different general managers that he worked with at some point in the league. And 4 of them told him there's a chance Caleb Downs gets to 10. One of them said, nah, probably not. So could you walk away from this draft with Sonny Styles at 5 and Caleb Downs at 10? I mean, and if you can, could you possibly say no to that, even though it's 2 defensive players? I would have a hard time running away from that, to be honest with you. I think you're setting up the middle of your defense for a decade. If you do that, having that quality of a safety of a middle linebacker and having those guys work together, given the chemistry they already built at Ohio State with Matt Patricia, who's an NFL defensive coach. So I'd have trouble saying no to that, to be honest with you. And, even if you don't get, Downs, maybe you get Mansour Delane at 10, right? I think that would be a really good value at 10 also. And I think in terms of, and just the way I have my board, those would be like the best player combinations you can get. However, the Giants do need help on the offensive line. You talk about how great Giant teams are built on the defense, right? I think you're correct. I also think they're built up front on offense. You look at some of the best Giant teams, they had really good offensive lines. So, you pick your best player, which is probably going to be a defender at 5. And then if Fano or Maui Noah is still there at 10, you go there. I would have no problem with that. And then this is kind of the scenario that I fell asleep thinking about last night, because I've been rolling through all these in my head over the course of the last, couple of days since the trade went down Saturday night. Do you say, all right, maybe this is a little bit of a luxury now, and we want to pick the best offensive player in the draft, and you pick Jeremiah Love at 5, and then pick the best defensive player left on the board at 10. So you get Dart, the best possible weapon on the board. I know he's a running back, and I have my issues with picking running backs in the top 10. But does this widen the window a little bit to do something like that, knowing you can still get a really good defensive player at 10 to help on that side of the ball? So I think it gives you a lot of different options now as you look at these 2 picks in the top 10.
John, so in 2022, it was a little easier for the Giants. They picked at 5 and 7. They only had one team they sort of had to get insight on at 6 that was sandwiched in between. And if you're in that Giants war room, right, the conversation you're having is like, okay, who the hell can we take now that we know the Panthers are going to take? But it's a risk because the Panthers could trade the pick. So, like, even whatever your best knowledge you put together could get screwed if a trade-up happens. It's a lot more difficult between 5 and 10. There's a lot that can happen there. If you're the Giants, to your point, you're trying to figure out what combination, what do we have to do? Are we forced to do something here? Because, like, one thought in my head, John, is if the Giants want to go wide receiver, to me, legitimately, the wide receiver conversation in this draft starts at 5. I've heard whispers about Tennessee potentially taking a wide receiver. I think that's malarkey. I don't think that's true. But so Giants at 5, if you think that's a conversation. Browns at 6, Washington at 7. I've seen Saints take a receiver at 8. I've seen Chiefs take a receiver at 9. Now all of a sudden, are you forced? Like, maybe you don't have Jordan Tyson or Cardinal Tate or whoever your wide receiver choice is that high, but you're like, as we're playing this game, if we don't take it at 5, it's Magic Johnson. It ain't going to be there at 10. So how do you sort of debate that process?
Well, I think I wouldn't be married to having to take a wide receiver. I think that's the way I would look at that, right? I think, would it be nice to walk away with a wide receiver in the first round? Sure. But if you, so let's say all 3 wide receivers do go between 5 and 10. And look, I do think that's possible. I don't think that's out of the question. I'm with you. I think any of those teams could pick a wide receiver. I think you're 100% right. All right, well, then one of the offensive tackles is going to get to you at 10. And I think you feel fine about that, whether it's Fano or Maui Noah. One of those guys will be there if you get those 3 wide receivers. Delane will get there, or Downs will get there. So I think it depends what you think of the wide receiver class. I don't think any of the wide receivers in this class are like number 1 wide receivers. I think they're all number 2s at best. So I wouldn't be married to picking a wide receiver, but you're right. This is when your contacts around the league are really going to be, I think, useful. I do think this is a dangerous draft to kind of play that game with, because I do think this is probably going to be one of the more unpredictable drafts we've had in a long time, because I don't think you have the huge list of great players at premium positions at the top of this draft. So I think there are going to be a lot of surprises. So I think trying to predict what's going to happen between 5 and 10 gets difficult. And then look, we've heard all sorts of rumors. What if the Cowboys try to trade up, right? To 6 with Cleveland, something like that. then what are they going to do? So I think trying to anticipate that, as much as I said it in my last answer, is a possibility. I think that gets dicey. I think if you're the Giants, and look, I don't know what they're thinking upstairs. This is just my humble opinion, which is not nearly as informed as what's going on up there.
Yeah.
But you're trying to build something with John Harbaugh here, right? You just traded one of your best defensive players for a draft pick. So that sends a message to me that this is not a all in for this year type of scenario, right? Where you're not saying we got to win this year no matter what. So I think you just go in, you get to 5. Whoever the best player is on your board that you think is going to have the biggest impact on your team for the next 10 years, you pick that guy. You get to 10, you do the same exercise. And I think whatever you wind up with, if it's 2 defensive players, fine. If it's 1 defensive player, 1 offensive player, fine. I think, to your point, if you try to get cute, it gets very difficult. Because trying to predict what these teams are going to do between 6 and 9, I think is fraught with danger. And if you lose out on the better player because you're trying to play some type of draft game hoping he gets to 10, I think that's something you might regret when all said and done.
John, talking about receiver for a minute, there's a lot of scuttlebutt out there about Joe Shane's visit out with Jordan Tyson and the fact that maybe he's jumped all the way to the top of the Giants wide receiver board. I was listening to Dan Orlovsky this morning. He thinks the Giants are going to take him at 5, that they take a pick right there. I don't know. That might be a little outlandish, but maybe it's not. If you think, as Dan is saying, he's the next Odell Beckham Jr., that's the comparison he's making. Give me your thoughts about this last-minute scrambling and when GMs and coaches go visit with players at the last moment. Is this an indicator, or is this just doing your due diligence here?
I'm actually glad you asked me that question because the Giants go out of their way to go to a lot of these pro days and stuff, even when they have no intention of picking the player. They've certainly done that with quarterbacks before. And I would just be very leery in reading too much into that, right? I think it gets dangerous. I think you go there, you get all the information you possibly can, and you kind of figure it out from there. But because if you look at some of the reported 30 visits the Giants have had, and I'm not, the Giants don't announce these, but these are the ones that have been reported. They pretty much met with every top wide receiver in this draft on a 30 visit, right? So they have interest in all these guys, and that includes guys that could be picked at 37 as much as they could be picked at 5 and 10. And again, this is just my opinion on the class. Like, would it shock me if Casey Concepcion or Denzel Boston had similar or better careers than Mekhi Lemon or Jordan Tyson? That wouldn't shock me. I mean, I just don't think there's as much separating those guys as you normally have in a year. And then, what do they think of Jordan Tyson's health situation? I think if he doesn't have any injuries, he might be the top receiver on my board, but he's missed over 30% of his games in college due to injury. And it's been a myriad of injuries: hamstring, knee, shoulder, clavicle. Yeah, exactly. So these are all things that you have to take in consideration when you look at it. But no, I would not just assume Joe Shane went to Jordan Tyson's pro day. That means the Giants are picking him at 5 and 10. I think that, look, if teams and fans want to do that, that's great. But knowing what I know about how Joe Shane operates, they always go above and beyond doing their due diligence on every prospect. So, if they pick Mekhi Lemon over Tyson at 10, that would not surprise me one bit.
John, let me ask you about the acquisitions and how that affects the Giants wide receiver room. We know they went out and got Darnell Mooney. They went out and got Calvin Austin. So does that, make that room a little bit more secure? Obviously, they lost Wandale. They still have some pieces. Obviously, Neighbors hopefully will be back sooner rather than later. I mean, Talk to me about what the weaponry is in that room and how important it is for the Giants, perhaps early in this draft, if at all, to address wide receiver.
I think it gives you protection for the present, right? So you don't have that desperate need for this year to draft a wide receiver that you have to put in the room today. But Austin and Mooney were just 1-year deals. And other than Malik Neighbors, you really don't have anyone else under contract beyond this year in that wide receiver room. So I think it is very important that you walk away with a wide receiver at some point in this draft. I do think it's a very deep drafted wide receiver. So I personally would be okay waiting till round 4 and deciding to make a move there. It's not going to maybe come and help you right away, but I think you're okay for this year, given the Austin and the Mooney signings. I don't know if they're long-term answers for you. I think Mooney especially will have a chance to prove that this year. We've seen him have 2 really good seasons as a pro, one under Matt Nagy, who's now the Giants offensive coordinator. But they signed Isaiah Likely, not a wide receiver, but he is a weapon, a passing game weapon. So I think that also, they're not going to be running as many 3 wide receiver sets. They're going to be a lot of 12 personnel. So I think that limits, a little bit the wide receiver need. But I don't think you have to get one at 5 or 10 if you want your offense to function decently this year.
John, I'm curious your take on, Harbaugh. It's been all honeymoon, and for good reason, right? The newspaper.
It always is before you start playing games, man.
100%. So it's been all gravy. And again, I have no problem with it. It should be. If I was a Giants fan, I'd be losing it right now. So this Dexter Lawrence situation was the first turbulent waters he has had to face since being the Giants head coach in a very short period of time here. And this may be an impossible question to answer right now, but I'll throw it at you because you're John Schmeelk, for God's sake. So if anyone can answer impossible questions, it's John Schmeelk. How do you think he handled these choppy waters? A really great player on your team, public trade request, a lot of sloppiness, on social media and airing of laundry and all this stuff with the situation. And you guys were able to flip him for the 10th overall pick of the draft, which candidly, I'm surprised that was the kind of return value you got. How do you think he handled this situation?
I mean, I think speaking publicly, I think he was fine. I think he would have loved to have Dexter Lawrence here as a player in terms of what he does for the middle of your defense. I mean, the way he can rush the passer as a nose tackle is a one-of-one situation in this league. He's a great player when he's right. He was not right last year. And I think it was becoming pretty clear based on his willingness to accept that trade on the limited extension and the extra money that he got. Tells me this was as much of him just not wanting to be here as it was about him getting money, right? It's not like he got some 4-year, $120 million extension when he got to Cincinnati. It was just, plugging 1 year on that at $28 million. I mean, it's not like that. That to me is, my guess is that the Giants would have been willing to do that. But my guess is that Dexter wasn't willing to take that from the Giants. You know what I mean? Again, I don't know that's just my guess. I don't think that's some outlandish, extension that the Bengals gave him. So I think if you're John Harbaugh, you're sitting there and you're like, all right, if this guy really doesn't want to be here and he's going to be unhappy, is this one of the guys I want to be a leader on my team if he's going to be not a great locker room presence, right? And not be happy and maybe be at, and just not take things as seriously as you want him to. So it was a bad situation. You'd much rather not have it. You'd much rather have Dexter here at his 100% self. But was he going to be his 100% self? Was he going to participate in the offseason program? Was he going to be in shape? Was he going to play like the player last year? Was he going to play like the player from 2 years ago? So it was not a great situation. I think they handled it as best as they can. And I said it before you came on here, Paul, I thought they got much more. I mean, look, I was talking, second round pick, last week before the trade got done. So when I saw the 10, I was waiting to be like, oh, but the Giants also sent their 3rd round pick back.
Right.
The Giants also sent the 2 next year. Like I was waiting for that and it just never came. So I think great job on the return, man. Like unbelievable.
We're inside the Giants Manchild Show with Boyd Green Digital at MC Show Digital. Don't forget to pop that like on the way in the room and also become a subscriber if you're not already. You see it right there, youtube.com/at MC Show Digital. We are presented by Northeast Roofing Professionals. Today's video brought to you by our friends at Box Drop Syracuse. We'll take 30 seconds here from Box Drop, and then we're back with more with Giants insider John Schmeelk. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Considering that we sleep nearly 1/3 of our lives, buying the right mattress is essential. At Box Drop Syracuse Mattress and Sofa Outlet, you'll get a unique experience, one that saves you 30 to 70% off retail prices on top-of-the-line mattresses like Sapphire Sleep. At Box Drop, you'll schedule a mattress fitting appointment and get one-on-one service directly with Paul, the owner. No middleman. Family-owned, huge savings, no-pressure sales designed to save you time and money. And now Box Drop Syracuse has sectional sofas and love seats as well, with prices designed to fit your budget. Box Drop Syracuse Mattress and Sofas. Set up your appointment today at boxdropsyracuse.com.
All right, we are back talking Inside the Giants with John Schmeelk down in the Giants studio, down there in the headquarters. John, all right, I know you and I were talking a little bit off air before the video about you putting your draft board together. So I got some John Schmeelk kind of questions here about who you like. Forget about who Joe Shane likes. Forget about who the Giants like. Who does John Schmeelk like? So let me ask you about these two players. In your opinion, more dynamic player, if indeed the Giants end up with them, Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs?
Those guys have literally tags touching, and I've moved them back and forth on my board over the course of the last couple of months. I think I've settled. I think Downs is the safer player because I think you know exactly what you're getting out of him. But I would lean Styles, I think, just because I think his athletic upside is a little bit higher. I think he plays a little bit more valuable of a position at middle linebacker than safety. So I think, you know, everyone went nuts about his combine stuff, which is fine. He was the 5th overall player on my board before he did anything at the combine. Like, he's just a really 6'4", 240. He can cover. He can play the run, sideline to sideline. He played in an NFL style defense at Ohio State. So I would lean Styles there, but man, tomorrow I might have a different opinion. I think those two guys are very close. I think they're both great players. And I think any team that gets either one of them would be very, very happy.
John, let's get deep. In your life, do you like to live on the edge and you're risky, or do you play things safe in your life? And does that factor in to the draft? Because, you know, some people, they have a top 10 pick. They're like, I don't want to F this up. I feel pretty good about this guy. The character, the whatever is very high. I'm feeling pretty good that this is, we'll use some baseball here. I'm pretty sure this guy's a double. And let's see if it'll be more. Some people say, I'm swinging for the fences, baby. I'm not at this point of the draft all the time. I want to hit this. I want this to be a Hall of Famer. I want this to be a superstar, an all-pro, and all these things. So I'm willing to risk it to get the biscuit. And the floor, well, maybe this guy's out of the league in 3 years.
I would try to hit the double myself.
Okay.
I think especially the Giants with where they are trying to build in a new program with John Harbaugh, you know, you don't want to draft the bust here. You got to get good football players at 5 and 10, which is why I'm okay drafting a safety and a linebacker, even though they're not premium positions, because I feel really confident they're going to be really good players. And I think we also overestimate our ability to really understand and know what players have high ceilings and low floors. So you might draft a guy that you think is a, you know, high floor, low ceiling guy. He might end up being the highest ceiling guy in the draft. I just don't think you know sometimes. So I think if I'm the one making the pick, give me the double off the wall all day long and give me a guy that I know is going to be a really good football player and he's going to help my football team, especially in this draft, which we talked about in the top 10 is not what we usually think of it as a top 10 draft.
John, a guy that's a lightning rod and it just continues to be bandied about by talking heads on television, and I'm sure GMs as well, Jeremiah Love. Where is Jeremiah Love on John Schmeelk's draft board? How high?
All right, so there is some nuance to this. In terms of just overall talent and grade, I think he's probably the best player in this draft, to be honest with you. Just like he is a better running back than anyone else is a player at their position. Now, that does not mean I would pick him first, right? So when I do my board, it's just based on grade. How good of a football player are you? And then I had him broken into tiers. So he's in the same tier at the top of this draft for me. I push quarterbacks aside because I think they're a completely different group. So I'm going to leave Mendoza out of this with Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, and Caleb Downs. It's those three guys and Jeremiah Love. Though that's like the top 4 that I have on my personal opinion board. I think Love probably, all things being equal, like if all 4 guys played the same position, Love would be my pick. But I do think running back, you know, people talk about position value, but I think running back is almost like not quite to the extent that quarterback is, but kind of on its own island for a few different reasons. One, I think you talk about the cost, right? It's just not a highly paid position is one. Number 2, you don't know what the shelf life is for running backs. It's much lower than it is for any other position. 3 rather. I can't count. You don't have 2 running backs on the field at the same time. Right? If you draft another really good linebacker, you have another linebacker. Well, guess what? 2 are on the field.
Mm-hmm.
If the Giants draft Caleb Downs, he can play with Javon Allen and Tyler Newman in a 3-safety lineup. You can get all those guys on the field. Guess what? If you draft Jeremiah Love and he's playing, 75, 80% of the snaps, then what happens to Cam Scatterbo and Tyrone Tracy? You're basically relegating those guys to 15 snaps a game, right? Is that really helping your team? And then the last part of it is, more so than other positions, running backs are slaves to the situation around them, right? You look at Ashton Genty last year. Great running back. Awesome prospect. He went to the Raiders for a team that had no offensive line. It was terrible. It wasn't Genty's fault. He just didn't have the situation around him to succeed. Now, I do think the Giants situation is strong. I don't think it's a Raiders situation. I think the line's much better than it was. We'll see what happens at right guard. And I think he would be an accelerator for this offense. But I do think running back is a unique position. So I would, like if I'm drafting, I would not draft Love before I draft Reese, styles and downs. I do think it's a little bit more of an interesting conversation when you start saying, well, do you pick Love or Cardinal Tate? Because I have Love on a different tier than Cardinal Tate, right? I have Love as that highest tier. Tate's on the next tier down. That's when I think you can start having that conversation. Is it worth picking the receiver or is it worth picking the running back if you have that much separating that group of guys? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. John, does the recent history with, Joe Shane was here for the Saquon Barkley drama, if I might say. John Harbaugh wasn't. Don Aponte wasn't. How does that play, if at all, as to whether or not the Giants would take Love if he were on the board at 5, just sitting there like a nice piece of steak?
I don't think the Barkley thing, specifically would impact that decision making. I do think, understanding your willingness to pay a running back on a second contract if he does hit, right? I think that's something, right? If you're Joe Shane and John Harbaugh and you're like, well, I don't want to pay a running back on a second contract. Well, then is it worth drafting him? It's going to get messy heading into the 5th-year option, then the franchise tag, and then the Saquon thing. You start thinking about that, right? So I think that's probably part of it. You have to. Joe Shane has always been a premium position value type of guy, but he has said this year in the draft you kind of have to throw that out. But look at John Harbaugh's history, right? Aside from Derrick Henry, they never invested big time capital in a running back. You have to go back to like Jamal Lewis, right? When they won the Super Bowl back in the day. And he wasn't even that. I don't even think he was head coach when they drafted Lewis. I think he got drafted before Harbaugh got there, if I remember right.
He did.
So,
yeah.
To me, he's never been a big invest high picks and running back type of guys. And as a guy who had a bunch of picks at the end of the first round, when I think it's more realistic 2-pick running backs, the fact the Ravens never did that, I think is telling. So for me, I think J.K. Dobbins was their highest running back taken. He was a 2nd-round pick, right? Mm-hmm. So I would be surprised if they went that direction just based on the history of Joe Shane and John Harbaugh in terms of how they've handled the running back position.
Again, we're speaking with John Schmeelk, our do-it-all man for the Giants. Now, I'm going to preface this, John, with this may be a stupid question, but so sort of leave that where it is. But here we go. Okay, the Giants got the 10th overall pick in exchange for Dexter Lawrence. That's pretty awesome, and apparently we're aligned with, whoa, okay, they got that. That's nice. But if I gave you the choice, door number 1 or door number 2, and you get to pick whichever one you wanted, you could have the 10th overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, or mystery door number 2, the 2027 first from the Bengals. Now, it may sound stupid because once a 10th overall pick, and Joe Burrow, if he's healthy, they're not picking 10 in the 2027 draft. But also, people perceive the 2027 draft a lot differently than 2026, so a pick can be used as an asset. If you had your choice, is it a difficult decision if you had either of those options on the table, or is it easy?
No, I think that's actually a really good question because you figure the Bengals are going to be better, right? Because they have Dexter Lawrence now. He's going to improve their defense.
Yeah.
You have Joe Burrow. Mm-hmm. They have a good offense. Burrow does have injury history. I mean, you have to decide whether or not you think the Bengals pick next year will be significantly higher or lower. Mm-hmm. And I think that's always the NFL, as you guys well know, is a very hard thing to predict.
Right.
Next year's draft is supposed to be better. I'm also very leery of sitting here and, proclaiming that. All I heard last year was that, the 26 quarterback class is going to be great. Just wait for 26. And then look where we are.
Yeah.
So I think that's dangerous. That's a really good question.
Okay.
I think given the fact that Giants believe they have their quarterback already, I think I would take the number 10 pick this year because that pick next year could easily be 19 or 20. So I think I would take the 10 pick this year, but I think I could be convinced otherwise. That to me is a very, very, very tough decision.
And I would say, just to add in, I think I would land on the same boat as you because I have Jackson Dart right now. Losing Dexter Lawrence makes me a worse football team. Having him on your team versus not having him on your team. And the 10th overall pick, that can help you right now. A future pick, that doesn't help you, and you lost Dexter Lawrence, and you got to somehow replace that, which I'm sure we'll talk about here on the show. So I think I ultimately land your boat because of Jackson Dart. If I didn't have Jackson Dart, I think it makes it a little bit easier to kick that can down the road and go for 27. So I think you ended up on the right thing, I think.
Yeah. John, let me ask you about trades. A lot of people think this could be a very boisterous first round here in terms of trades. If you had to put a percentage on the Giants trading one of their first 3 picks, I'll include that high 2nd-round pick that they have at 37. What would you put that percentage at that the Giants will make a trade to try and acquire some more draft capital?
Okay, I'd be surprised if 5 or 10 got moved, just because I don't think there's going to be a ton of demand for teams to move up in that first top 10 area. I just don't think. Look, I've said it a million times. It's just a different type of top 10. So I'm not sure teams going to be looking to move up. I know Dallas is a team that has been rumored. I talked to a couple people over the weekend, and they said, they think they're going to stay put now. So I don't think you're going to get that. So I think that's really small. I think the sweet spot to trade back is 37. You get at the end of the day Thursday, the Giants have the 5th pick in round 2, and teams go to bed and they get locked in on 1 or 2 players that they really want at the top of the 2nd round. And we always see every year a bunch of trades between picks 32 and 40 as teams try to move up to get players that they value at the top of the 2nd round. So I think there's a decent chance. I'll just talk about that pick. I think if you want to go all 3 together, 30% chance the Giants trade down out of one of those picks. But I think if you're talking just that pick at 2 in round 2, I think that could be a 50-50 proposition where you might have a really good chance of getting a team that wants to come up to 37. Now, you might be sitting there, though, and like, all right, well, one of these defensive tackles I really want, whether it's Caden McDonald or Christian Miller are there, and then you're not moving, right? You pick the player and you run and you feel good about it. If Chris Johnson or Colton Hood get to 37 and, you didn't pick Mansour Delane with 5 or 10, I don't think you can trade out of that pick. If Denzel Boston drops to 37, are you moving out of that pick? Like, there are certain players you don't want to move out of if it's really a need and that guy's sitting there. Yeah. But if those groups get wiped out, or there's 5 or 6 guys or 8 guys that you really like at 37 and a team wants to, move up 8 or 9 spots, you can pick up a 3rd round pick, which the Giants don't have. They love to pick up a 3 in this draft because they don't have one. That was moved in the Jackson Dart trade last year. I could see that 2nd round pick being something that the Giants would be, more important than anything else, able to move if they decided to do it.
John, to fill the Dexter hole, you just mentioned one of the guys. If you could pick a guy in this draft to fill that hole, who might that guy be on your board?
If you're looking just for a run stuffer, I think it's Caden McDonald. I think as a nose tackle, I think he's a guy that will help you build the wall up there. He has some juice, but I don't know what the pass rush upside is there. He didn't really rush the passer much at all for Ohio State this year. I think Christian Miller is gives you a little bit more as a pass rusher. I think he's a little bit more juice and athleticism. The way Georgia used him was a little bit weird. They used him as like a looper a lot on stunts and twists. You didn't really have a chance to just get upfield on one-on-one situations. I'm a big Christian Miller fan. I do have him slightly ahead of McDonald on my board, but I think McDonald, if you're just looking for a run stuffer, I think he's probably a little bit of a safer pick. But either one of those 2 guys would be the 2 that I'd be looking at 37 if you really want to give you some help and meat up there a defensive tackle.
John, you mentioned it earlier, so you've definitely heard it, and obviously you do all these great draft interviews leading up through the entire process of getting people in, so you're hearing the whispers. All the NFC East trade rumors, the Dallas Cowboys could make a splash. I've heard Eagles rumors they could trade up. Washington only has 2 picks inside the top 146 of this draft, so they seem like a very likely trade back candidate at 7, which is sandwiched in between 5 and 10, which creates some drama. How much of that is on your mind as you're preparing for Giant stuff and Giants draft, hearing that there's someone sort of looking over your shoulder, that there may be some influence inside the division? Does that affect you at all? Does that affect you nothing? Hey, I'm doing my picks. I don't give a flying dude what the hell they're doing over there.
Yeah, and this afternoon I'm going to have to prepare. We're doing our final, 32 team, first round mock on draft season, our draft podcast coming up later this week. So I'm going to start thinking about all that. If I'm the Giants, though, you have to do what's best for you, right? And I know I've talked to other Giant fans. They're like, man, I would never trade with inside the division. I don't care. If I think that trade's helping me, I'm making the trade, right? I don't think you can worry about what the other team in the division's doing.
But is there a tax? Do you put an extra tax on the division stuff? I've heard some people believe it, some people don't.
I think if it's a good trade for you, it's a good trade for you. And I think if you're getting good value, I think you trust your analysis, and I think you just get good value for the trade. If you don't, you shouldn't make the trade either way, right? Whether it's in the division or not. So I think you should just evaluate the trade on its face. And if you think it's a good move, you make it. And if it's not, you don't. But yeah, look, I don't think there's going to be a ton of movement, especially early. I think later on, I think this is a very flat draft, guys. I think between picks 16 and 60, 55, I think it's very flat, where you got 40 players and there's not much of a difference in grades. And I think teams are going to be all over the place from board to board. So I think in that area, if teams fall in love with a player, maybe you might see some movement, but I don't think you're going to see a ton of movement at the top.
All right, John, we're in the home stretch, baby. We're days out from the draft. I'm going to be there in Pittsburgh. It's going to be insane. So, John, set us up for all the content. You just teased some of it that's coming here over the final days here as Giant fans are on the edge of their seat for this 2026 NFL draft.
Yeah, I mentioned draft season. You can find that as well as our interview podcast. And I appreciate you mentioning that, Boy Green. Giants Huddle Podcast. It's on the Giants official podcast network feed. Just search for that in your favorite podcast platform if you're a Giant fan. Subscribe to it. Draft season, by the way, we do all 32 teams. It's not just the Giants. So if you want a good draft podcast, check that out too. It's on the same feed. Just search for Giants Podcast Network, Draft Season, or Giants Huddle. We have Brian Broaddus, former NFL scout, this week. We have Mike Mayock coming up this week. Nick Baumgartner coming up this week. Last week, if you go into the archive, now this is pre-Dexter Lawrence trade, but you can still talk about picks 5 and 37. We had Dane Brugler last week. We had Todd McShay last week. We had Field Yates last week. We had Matt Miller the week before that, Nate Tice. So a lot of really good guests that have joined us on the Giants Huddle podcast. So people should go check that out. You can find a Giants YouTube channel too, Giants app, Giants.com. And then, of course, Big Blue Kickoff Live is our daily live show talking Giants football every day from 12:30 to 1:30 on those same platforms. Then we're doing live content Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday afternoon. If you folks are local in New York City, WFAN, we have a live draft preview show tonight from 7 to 9. Myself, Mark Malusis, Paul Dottino will be on. So all that stuff, check it out, all the Giants platforms. And if you like the draft and if you like the Giants, we got you covered.
John, just so nonchalant. Where's the flexing when you're, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Those are some strong guests, man, on the podcast. Huh?
It's a labor of love, man. I love doing it.
Draft season, always fun. It just got extra special for us Giants fans with 2 picks in the top 10. Welcome to Draft Week. John Schmeelk, always appreciate your time, your insight. Have a great week, my friend. Enjoy it.
By the way, Arvell, Reese, or Bailey at 2. You guys, what do we got?
Let me make this clear because I heard the Tad. Like on April 15th, Todd McShay said, everything I've heard in David Bailey's a foregone conclusion. 3 days later, he tweets out, yeah, I think it's Arvell Reese. I don't know what the hell's going on in the McShay residence, but I'll tell you this. I've been on it since the beginning, and I have not moved. I've been Mel Gibson. Hold. It's Arvell Reese, baby. He's clearly the pick at number 2, so I don't want to hear any of this drama. I like David Bailey, too. He led college football and sacks last year. I'm not going to be upset, but it's Arvell Reese, man.
All right. I like it. That's what I would pick too, but I'm with you. I would not be a David Bailey. I think is like the fifth player on my board or 6th player on my board. He's really good. I'd be happy with either one.
Yeah. Fantastic. John, thank you as always.
Right,
appreciate it.
Thank you guys.